My brother stood at the Thanksgiving table and told 14 relatives that I had abandoned our family. He said it with actual tears running down his face. His hand rested on my mother's shoulder in exactly the right spot, gentle, protective, perfectly placed. 14 people sat around that long table with their food going cold, nodding slowly, looking at me with that particular combination of sympathy and quiet judgment I had watched build for years. Ethan was always good with rooms. He knew how to fill them, how to read them, how to make himself the center without appearing to try. My name is Claire Dawson. I'm 26 years old. I grew up the second child. The quiet one, the one who moved 4 hours away after college and built her own life while my older brother stayed close to home and became, in the language of every family gathering I ever attended, the responsible son. The devoted one. The good one. What nobody at that Thanksgiving table understood, not my mom, not my aunts, not my cousins, was that Ethan had spent nearly 3 years quietly taking money that did not belong to him. From our parents. And from me. Before I continue, if this story earns it, please like and subscribe. Drop your location and the time there in the comments. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to where this truly started. I want to be honest about my childhood before I say anything else. My parents, Frank and Sandra Dawson, were not cruel people. They worked hard. My dad drove a delivery truck for 22 years. My mom managed the front office at a dental practice. They paid their bills on time, went to church on Sundays, and loved their children in the only way they knew how. The problem was they loved us differently. Ethan was 3 years older than me and arrived in their lives when they were still young and full of energy. He was loud and confident and good at sports, and my dad especially lit up around him in a way I noticed before I had words to describe it. I was quieter. I liked books. I asked too many questions at school and not enough at home. I got good grades that were acknowledged briefly and then set aside. Ethan got a B- on a history test once and my dad framed the paper as a joke. Everyone laughed. The frame stayed up for 2 years. I don't say this for sympathy. I say it because you need to understand the environment Ethan operated inside. He had been the favored child for so long that everyone, including my parents, accepted it as simply the natural order of things. It made what he eventually did much easier to get away with. Ethan's version of himself was very polished. He was charming the way certain people are charming. Smoothly, without visible effort, so that you feel good simply being near him and only realize later that you can't remember him asking a single question about you. He gave compliments easily. He remembered birthdays. He volunteered to help with things in front of witnesses and then quietly arranged for someone else to handle the actual work. My parents adored this version of him completely. What I saw growing up was a different layer underneath. I watched him lie to cover small things he had no reason to lie about simply because it was easier. I watched him borrow money from friends and forget to return it. I watched him take credit for efforts other people had made. I never said anything. He was my older brother and I was the quiet one, and that was simply how our household worked. When I was 15, I won a regional writing competition. The prize was a small scholarship and an invitation to read my essay at a community event. My dad had a prior commitment, Ethan's baseball playoffs. My mom attended my reading, sat in the third row and clapped warmly. She said afterward that I had done very well. My dad asked about it at dinner. Ethan answered before I could. She read something. It went fine. My dad nodded and passed the potatoes. I left for college at 18 and felt for the first time like I could breathe properly. I studied accounting. It suited the part of me that liked clear answers and organized systems and problems that could actually be solved if you worked through them carefully enough. I graduated in 4 years with no debt because I worked 2 jobs the entire time. My parents came to the ceremony. Ethan did not. He said he had a work conflict. I got a job at a mid-sized accounting firm 40 miles from my college town and rented a small apartment. I called home every Sunday. Mostly my mom answered. Sometimes my dad. Occasionally the phone rang out entirely. I told myself this was normal. Adult children and their parents settle into different rhythms. Life gets busy on both sides. But I noticed that when I came home for holidays, certain things had shifted. The dynamic in the house had rearranged itself further around Ethan. He lived 20 minutes away. He came to Sunday dinners. He had opinions about decisions my parents were making, financial ones, medical ones, and those opinions were treated as conclusions. I was the daughter who visited twice a year and asked how everyone was doing. He was the son who was actually present. I didn't understand yet how deliberately that gap had been arranged. My grandfather, Walt Dawson, died 3 years ago in September. He was 81, quiet and steady, a former electrician who had saved carefully his entire life. He lived in the same small house for 40 years, drove the same truck for 12, and wore the same 3 sweaters in rotation until the elbows wore through. He was not a man who talked about money. He simply kept it organized and let it sit. I drove home for the funeral. Ethan was already there when I arrived, positioned at my parents' side in the front pew like someone who had been managing things for some time. At the reception afterward, Ethan mentioned briefly that Grandpa Walt had a small trust and that Mr. Brennan, the family's longtime lawyer, was handling the administration. He said it casually, the way you mentioned something already sorted. Did he leave anything to us? I asked. Ethan shrugged. Not really. Some things to Dad. You know how Grandpa was. Brennan's handling it. I accepted that. There was no reason yet not to. But 2 weeks later, I called Mr. Brennan's office simply to introduce myself and leave my contact details. His receptionist said he had already been in touch with all relevant parties. I assumed I wasn't one of them. I was wrong about that. My dad was diagnosed with early-stage dementia 18 months after Grandpa Walt's funeral. My mom called me on a Wednesday evening. Her voice was completely steady in the way that means someone is working very hard to keep it that way. The doctor said it was mild at this stage. He was still functional, still himself most of the time. But there were gaps. Moments where words left him. Decisions he couldn't track properly. A growing dependence on routine and familiar people nearby. I asked my mom what I could do. She said Ethan was handling things. He had already spoken to the doctor, organized the insurance paperwork, and set up a joint bank account to help manage expenses directly. He's been wonderful, she said. I don't know what I'd do without him. I asked if I should come home more often. She said it wasn't necessary just yet, things were under control. I offered to contribute financially toward Dad's care. She said Ethan had it covered. I want to be completely honest about how I felt in that moment. I felt relieved. I told myself I was relieved because my parents had strong support nearby. But truthfully, part of me was relieved because it meant I didn't have to confront how far I had drifted from a family that had never fully made room for me. I should have pushed harder. I know that now. I came home for Thanksgiving 2 years ago and the house looked different. Not dramatically, nothing obvious at first glance. But the small repairs my dad always handled without thinking had piled up. A cracked gutter hanging loose at the corner. A back porch step with a split board. A kitchen faucet that had clearly been leaking for months based on the stain around the basin. My dad would never have let those things sit. My mom looked thinner. She mentioned briefly that the heating bill had been unexpectedly high that fall. At dinner, she said they had moved some savings to cover a few of Dad's medication costs. She said it quickly like a minor detail and moved on to something else. After dinner, I helped with dishes while Ethan sat at the kitchen table on his phone. When my mom went to check on Dad, I asked Ethan directly how the finances were looking. Fine, he said without looking up. It's a lot of moving parts with Dad's situation. I'm on top of it. Does Mom need more support? I asked. I can set up a monthly transfer. He looked at me then. Just briefly. I told you I've got it. There was something in his voice. Not irritation exactly. Something else. A quality I recognized from childhood. The sound of someone who has already made arrangements and does not want them complicated. I let it go. I shouldn't have. I found the letter 6 months ago inside my parents' filing cabinet. I was home for a weekend visit. My mom had asked me to locate Dad's updated insurance card, which she thought was stored in the hallway cabinet. Dad was having a difficult day, confused and frustrated, and she was occupied with him in the bedroom. I opened the cabinet and worked through the folders carefully. The insurance card was in the second folder. But behind it, wedged between a water bill and an old vehicle registration, was an envelope. Plain white. Mr. Brennan's office return address printed in the top left corner. Addressed to me, Claire Dawson, at my parents' home address. It had been opened. The postmark was 3 years old. 2 weeks after Grandpa Walt's funeral. Inside was a single page on formal letterhead. It informed me that I had been named as a beneficiary in the trust established by Walter Dawson. My share of the trust was $90,000. Mr. Brennan's office requested that I contact them within 30 days to complete the necessary disbursement paperwork. I stood in that hallway for a long time. The letter was 3 years old. I had never seen it. Nobody had ever mentioned it to me. And someone had opened it, read it, and hidden it behind a water bill. I placed it carefully inside my bag and finished finding the insurance card. My hands were steady. My breathing was steady. Inside, something had gone very still and very focused. I called Mr. Brennan's office on Monday morning. His receptionist remembered my name immediately, which told me this situation had not been forgotten on their end. Mr. Brennan came to the phone within 2 minutes. His voice was careful from the very first word. The voice of a man who understood that this conversation had been arriving for a long time. I told him I had found the letter. 3 years old, opened by someone else, hidden in a filing cabinet. A pause followed. Miss Dawson, he said slowly. Approximately 3 years ago, a disbursement authorization was submitted for your portion of the trust. Your brother Ethan brought it in person. He presented a signed letter stating you had authorized him to receive the disbursement on your behalf. I never signed anything like that, I said. I understand that now. Where did the $90,000 go? Into an account in Ethan's name, he said quietly. I should have contacted you independently to verify. I accepted the authorization without doing that. It was a serious error and I am genuinely sorry. I wrote down every word while we talked. Dates, account names, the exact sequence of events. Will you put all of that in writing? I asked. He didn't pause. Yes, he said. Completely and fully. I ended the call, sat at my kitchen table and opened a fresh notebook. I had been working in accounting for 3 years. I knew exactly how to build a paper trail. I need to stop here for a moment, because I know what some of you are thinking. You're wondering why I didn't immediately drive to my parents' house and confront Ethan directly. Why I didn't call my mom that same night. Why I didn't walk into a police station the following morning. Here is the honest answer. My brother had spent 29 years establishing himself as the devoted, present, deeply caring son in that household. My mom believed in him completely. My dad, in his current condition, couldn't reliably follow a difficult conversation. If I arrived with accusations and nothing else behind them, Ethan would simply explain everything away, smoothly, warmly, with that steady voice he always used in rooms full of people, and I would become the absent daughter causing trouble. I needed something real. Something that couldn't be talked away. And something told me the trust money was not the only thing I was going to find. I want to ask you something directly. Have you ever been the overlooked one in your family? The child who was never quite the favorite, who had to work twice as hard for half the recognition? Who watched someone else receive the benefit of every single doubt? Tell me in the comments. Because understanding that experience is exactly what kept me patient when everything inside me wanted to simply walk in and shout the truth as loudly as I could. I went back to my parents' house 3 weeks later with a clear purpose. I told my mom I wanted to help organize Dad's medical paperwork, which was true and gave me a natural reason to spend time looking through files without raising questions. Dad was having a good day. He recognized me clearly, held my hand at the kitchen table, and asked about my apartment in the specific caring way he had always asked questions before the dementia. I stayed with him for an hour before starting on the paperwork. Ethan had set up a joint account labeled Frank Dawson Care Fund. I found the account details in a folder marked medical in the filing cabinet. He was listed as the authorized signatory. My parents' contributions transferred in automatically from their personal savings on the 1st of each month, $1,500. I photographed the documents carefully. Then I visited the bank. As my dad's daughter, I had limited direct access to his accounts. But I explained my concerns to a bank officer named Ms. Petrie, calmly, factually, with the intercepted letter as supporting context. She couldn't share specific transaction details without a formal process. But she said something carefully measured. Something carefully measured. If you believe a vulnerable adult's finances may be at risk, there is a formal elder financial review process we can initiate. She slid a form across the desk. I filled it out before I left the building. Mr. Brennan agreed to meet me in person 2 weeks later. He came to a coffee shop on neutral ground. Not his office, not my parents' home. He was in his mid-60s, silver-haired, and carried the specific expression of a person who has made a professional mistake and is now working hard to do the right thing about it. He brought a folder. Inside was a copy of the authorization letter Ethan had presented 3 years ago, claiming to act on my behalf. It was typed on plain paper with my name and address at the top. The signature at the bottom was mine, or someone's careful version of mine. Processed quickly by a busy office administrator who had not looked closely enough. I placed my genuine signature beside it on a fresh piece of paper and we both looked at the two together. The letters were close but not right. The pressure was different. The loop in my lowercase letters didn't match. The way I always formed the capital D in my last name was entirely absent. I should have called you directly to confirm, Mr. Brennan said. Yes, I agreed. But you're helping now. He also told me that when Ethan arrived that day, he had mentioned unprompted that I was living abroad and very difficult to reach. That I had agreed everything should be handled through him for convenience. I had never lived abroad a single day in my life. He handed me a fully signed written statement covering every detail. Aunt Ruth called me on a Thursday evening in October. She was my dad's younger sister, small, sharp-eyed, with the steady manner that comes from spending decades as a school principal. She had watched our family from a careful distance for years, attending holidays, saying very little unless she had something specific to say. She had something specific to say now. Claire, she said. I've been watching Ethan manage things since your dad got sick. Something has been bothering me for months. I didn't want to speak out of turn. But I've been reading about elder financial exploitation lately and I think you need to hear what I witnessed. I told her I was listening. I was visiting your parents in March, she said. Your dad was having a particularly difficult day, confused about where he was, calling me by the wrong name. Ethan arrived with a folder of papers. He sat beside your dad at the kitchen table and guided him through signing several documents. He spoke very quickly and kept your dad moving from page to page without pausing. She stopped briefly. Your mom was out in the garden, she continued. I was standing in the hallway. I don't think Ethan realized I could see clearly from where I stood. I asked him afterward what your dad had signed. He said it was routine insurance updates. Another pause. It didn't look routine, she said. I asked Aunt Ruth if she remembered specific details about the documents. She had written everything down that same day, immediately after she got home, because something about the scene had stayed with her and she wanted to record it clearly while it was still fresh. She read from her notes over the phone. The folder had contained 4 documents. She had been able to read parts of the top page from the hallway. She saw the words beneficiary designation and what appeared to be an account number. She saw my name printed on the page, and then she watched Ethan place his hand over that section while guiding my dad to sign at the bottom. When she asked Ethan afterward what the paperwork covered, he had smiled warmly. Just keeping everything current, he said. Dad has been meaning to update these for a long time. My dad, still confused, had nodded along vaguely. My mom, coming in from the garden, had said, Ethan is so on top of everything. Aunt Ruth had gone home and written it all down. But she hadn't known what to do with it alone. She was a family member with a serious concern, not a lawyer with evidence. She had been waiting for someone else to begin pulling the thread. I should have called you sooner, she said quietly. You're calling now, I said. I asked her to write everything into a formal signed statement. She agreed immediately. By the first week of November I had built a complete picture. I spread everything across my kitchen table one evening after work and looked at the full shape of it. Ethan had intercepted Mr. Brennan's letter 3 years ago, the one informing me of my $90,000 inheritance. He had then forged an authorization letter in my name, walked into Mr. Brennan's office and collected my inheritance himself. He had positioned himself as the sole financial manager of our parents' care fund, $1,500 per month flowing from their savings, and the bank review was now determining how much of that money had gone toward actual care expenses versus his own account. He had guided our father through signing documents during a vulnerable dementia episode, covering my name on at least one beneficiary form with his hand, witnessed clearly by Aunt Ruth. The pattern was organized and patient. This was not someone acting out of sudden desperation. This was someone who had been planning carefully for a long time, using our family's deep trust in him as his primary tool. And my parents still believed he was their selfless, devoted son, quietly sacrificing everything while their other child kept her distance. I thought about my dad at that kitchen table, confused, trusting, signing whatever was placed in front of him. I thought about my mom saying, Ethan is so on top of everything. I closed the folder. Thanksgiving was 3 weeks away. Ethan called me on a Sunday in mid-November. He had heard through a cousin that I had been asking questions about Grandpa Walt's estate. The cousin hadn't shared details, only that I had seemed unusually interested. That was enough for Ethan to reach out. His voice was warm and relaxed when I answered. He started with small talk. Work, my apartment, the usual surface conversation. The familiar older brother performance he delivered when he wanted something. Then he got to it. I heard you've been looking into Grandpa's estate, he said casually. Just wanted to make sure you weren't confused about anything. The trust was fairly simple. Brennan handled everything cleanly. I've spoken with Mr. Brennan, I said. A short pause. Right. Good. He's very thorough. He was extremely helpful, I said. Another pause, noticeably longer. Claire, if you ever have concerns about anything, you can always come to me directly. You don't need to go around asking questions through other people. We're family. The word family landed the way it always did when Ethan used it, like a soft-sounding boundary. A reminder of the roles we were each supposed to play. I know, I said. I'll keep that in mind. I ended the call and sat quietly. He was already worried. Already working to manage the story before it could be told by someone else. That told me everything I needed to know. I spent the 2 weeks before Thanksgiving preparing carefully. Ms. Okafor, the estate attorney I had contacted through a professional referral from my firm, reviewed every document in my folder and confirmed what I already suspected. The forged authorization letter was sufficient grounds for a formal fraud claim. The beneficiary designation changes Aunt Ruth had witnessed would require a court order to access fully, but her detailed signed statement was powerful supporting evidence. The bank's elder financial review was still processing but moving in a clear direction. Ms. Okafor advised me to wait until the bank review completed before filing formally. You want the full picture, she said steadily. Filing too early with incomplete information gives him room to maneuver. But she also offered something practical. Thanksgiving is coming. You'll likely be in a room with your family. If Ethan decides to use that occasion to reinforce his version of events in front of witnesses, it would be wise to have your key documents available. She wasn't telling me to create a confrontation. She was telling me to be fully prepared if one arrived on its own. I made 2 organized copies of everything. The intercepted letter, Mr. Brennan's statement, Aunt Ruth's written account, and the bank's preliminary findings, which arrived 3 days before Thanksgiving, confirming $6,800 in unaccounted withdrawals from the care fund. I organized them into a plain folder and drove to my parents' house Thanksgiving morning. My parents' house was warm and full when I arrived. My mom had been cooking since early morning. The smell of roasting turkey and sweet potatoes reached the front door before I even knocked. She hugged me in the entrance and I held on a moment longer than usual. My dad was in his chair in the living room, more himself than I had expected. He looked up when I walked in and said my name clearly. He held my hand and told me I looked like my grandmother when she was young. I sat beside him for 20 minutes before the rest of the family started arriving. There were 14 people in total. My mom's sister and her husband. 3 cousins. Aunt Ruth, who had driven 2 hours and was already quietly helping in the kitchen. 2 of my parents' longtime friends who had been coming to Thanksgiving for years. And Ethan, who arrived last, which I recognized as deliberate, carrying a store-bought pie and a bottle of wine, filling the front hallway with warmth and noise the moment he walked through the door. He hugged my mom first, then cousins. Then finally he looked across the room at me. Claire. He smiled evenly. Good to see you. You too, I said. Aunt Ruth caught my eye from the kitchen doorway. She gave me one small, steady nod. The folder was in my bag. I was not going to use it unless he forced the moment. But I was completely ready. The meal started well. My mom had cooked everything from memory, the same dishes she prepared every year. Green bean casserole. Sweet potato with the marshmallow top she knew I always took extra of. Rolls that came out slightly too dark, which she apologized for 3 times. The table was full and genuinely warm in the way large family gatherings sometimes manage to be before something shifts. My dad was present and clear for the first hour. He told a long story about his old delivery route that made 3 people laugh. He ate well. He looked at my mom across the table with the kind of steady affection that comes from 28 years of marriage. I watched Ethan throughout all of it. He was performing well. Attentive to our mom, patient with dad, charming with the cousins. The devoted son, doing exactly what devoted sons do at a family table. Then between the main course and dessert he stood up. He tapped his glass lightly. The table settled. I just want to say something, he said. Warm and measured. He looked at our mom first, then our dad. Then his eyes moved to me. It's been a really hard couple of years managing everything here, he said. Some of us have been present, doing the actual work, making real sacrifices. A pause perfectly placed. And some of us have been less available. The table went quiet. 14 faces turned toward me. I let him finish. He continued for another full minute, talking about the difficulty of managing our father's care, the financial pressures involved, the personal opportunities he had set aside to remain present for our parents. He said all of it without naming me directly. He didn't need to. Every person at that table understood exactly who the speech was about. My mom nodded along, her eyes wet. Several cousins looked at me with that complicated expression. Not quite accusation, not quite pity. Something sitting uncomfortably between both. When Ethan finally sat down, the silence lasted one beat too long. I placed my napkin beside my plate. I stood up slowly and without rushing. Ethan's right that it's been a hard few years, I said. My voice was completely steady. I want to say something about that. He looked at me with the patient expression of someone who expects to win what happens next. 3 years ago, I said, Grandpa Walt left me $90,000 in a trust. I never received it. I never even knew it existed because the letter informing me was intercepted, opened, and hidden in this house. I paused once. The money was collected by someone using a forged letter signed in my name. The table went completely still. I'd also like to talk, I said carefully, about Dad's care fund. I reached into my bag and placed the folder on the table. I didn't raise my voice once. I took the documents out in the same order I had organized them and placed each one on the table clearly, the way I had been trained to present financial evidence, factually without dramatizing, letting the information carry its own weight. First, the intercepted letter from Mr. Brennan's office. 3 years old. Addressed to me. Already opened by someone else. I explained where I had found it, wedged behind a water bill in this family's own filing cabinet. Second, Mr. Brennan's signed written statement. In his own words, describing the day Ethan arrived at his office with a forged authorization letter, claiming I was living abroad and unreachable, and collecting my inheritance personally. Third, Aunt Ruth's signed statement. Her account of standing in the hallway in March, watching Ethan guide our father through signing documents during a bad dementia episode, covering my name on at least one page with his hand while Dad signed at the bottom. Fourth, the bank's preliminary elder financial review. $6,800 in withdrawals from the care fund that could not be matched to any documented care expenses for our father. I placed the last document down and looked up. My mom had both hands flat on the table, staring at the papers in front of her. Cousin Angela had leaned forward and was reading Mr. Brennan's statement from across the table. My dad was looking directly at Ethan. Ethan had not moved. Ethan spoke first. "This is completely insane," he said. The warmth had left his voice entirely. "Claire, you've always had a problem with me being the one who actually shows up. This is jealousy dressed up as paperwork." "The letter is real," I said. "Mr. Brennan's signature is real. You can call his office directly." "Brennan is an older man covering a processing error," Ethan said quickly. "Aunt Ruth's statement," I said. He looked at Ruth across the table. She looked back at him steadily. "I wrote down exactly what I saw," she said. "The same day I saw it. You saw me helping Dad with routine paperwork," he said, his voice shifting softer, more patient, the recalibrating tone I recognized. "You misunderstood what you were looking at." "The bank review," I said. A shorter pause this time. "Care expenses are complicated," he said. "There's cash spending, things that don't always get formally documented." $6,800, I said. He stopped. Cousin Angela had finished reading Mr. Brennan's full statement. She set it down and looked at Ethan with an expression that was no longer the sympathetic one from 15 minutes earlier. My mom's voice came from across the table. Very quiet. "Ethan," she said. "Is any of this true?" He looked at her. The table waited. And he looked away. My mom asked the question again. Not louder. More clearly. With the particular steadiness of a woman who has spent many years managing difficult moments quietly and knows exactly what she is doing. "Ethan. Look at me." He looked at her. "Did you take money that belonged to your sister?" The silence that followed was the longest of the entire evening. Outside, a neighbor's dog was barking somewhere on the street. A car passed slowly. The kitchen timer my mom had forgotten about went off briefly and then stopped on its own. Ethan's jaw tightened. "Mom, the situation is more complicated than. Did you take her inheritance?" He closed his eyes. He did not answer. But the answer was completely visible to every person seated at that table. My mom looked down at Mr. Brennan's statement in front of her. She read it slowly from the beginning all the way through. Then she looked across at my dad. He was watching Ethan with an expression that was more present and more focused than he had been all evening, as if the weight of something had pulled him back into the moment with unusual clarity. "Walt left that for both of you," my dad said. His voice was slow and deliberate in the way it sometimes was now, choosing each word carefully, making sure it landed right. "Both." Ethan said nothing. My mom reached across the table and took my hand. I let her hold it. That was the moment something began very slowly to shift. The legal process took 7 months. Ms. Okafor filed the formal fraud claim 2 weeks after Thanksgiving, once the bank's completed elder financial review came through. The final finding confirmed $11,200 in unaccounted withdrawals from our father's care fund across 22 months. Combined with the forged disbursement authorization and the $90,000 from Grandpa Walt's trust, the total Ethan had taken came to just over $101,000. He retained a lawyer. His position through the legal proceedings was that the trust disbursement had been a miscommunication, and that the care fund withdrawals were for legitimate expenses that simply hadn't been formally documented. His attorney used every available motion to slow things down. But Mr. Brennan's statement was clear. Aunt Ruth's statement was clear. The bank's forensic review was clear. And the forged authorization letter, examined by a handwriting specialist Ms. Okafor retained, was confirmed not to match my genuine signature in 7 specific and documentable points. Ethan settled out of court in late spring. The full amount was repaid. My inheritance restored entirely, the care fund reimbursed completely. He did not face criminal trial because my mom asked me privately not to pursue that path. She was still his mother. I understood that and I respected it. He was removed as authorized signatory on every account connected to my parents. I took over that role. Things are different now. Not perfect. Genuinely different. My mom and I talk every Sunday. Not brief surface-level check-ins. Real conversations, the kind where she tells me honestly how my dad is doing and I tell her honestly about my week. The kind we should have been having for years. My dad has good days and harder days. On the good days he is still entirely himself, warm and funny and careful with his words. I drove home 3 weeks ago on a regular Saturday, not a holiday, just to have lunch with him. He held both my hands at the kitchen table and said, "I'm glad you kept coming back." I told him I had always been coming back. My relationship with Ethan is finished. That is the plainest way to say it. He called once 4 months after the settlement, trying to find the right version of an apology. There wasn't one. I told him calmly that I wished him no harm, that I needed nothing from him and that I was done. I blocked his number before the end of that day. My mom understands. She doesn't ask me to forgive him publicly. She loves both her children. She's allowed to do that. Aunt Ruth comes to Sunday dinner once a month. She sits with my dad and argues cheerfully about old television programs and drinks too much sweet tea. My grandfather left me $90,000 because he believed I was worth protecting. I made sure he was right. If this story meant something to you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to fight to protect something that rightfully belonged to you?